As you know, every week we're interviewing someone who is either a community leader, an urban planner, architect, or a researcher to discuss topics that concerns future cities and innovative cities. How are we going to create a more prosperous and healthy and just environment for our children and the next generation? Today I have Margarita Iglesia with me, who's going to talk to us about urban planning and all issues that's related to the city, probably city of Boston and other issues. Margarita Iglesia is the director of educational curriculum in landscape architecture at Boston Architectural College. She has a master's degree in architecture and urban planning from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. She proudly have 20 years of professional experience in urban design and planning. She has achieved success in leading outstanding projects while working for several firms. Another note, Margarita was born in Spain and raised in Venezuela, and she likes to give credit to Venezuela with her progressive design and urban planning and ideas. And she came to Boston to go to Harvard School to get her master's degree at Harvard School, at Harvard University. So welcome, Margarita. I'm so excited to talk about the topics. Before I start grilling you with my questions, you tell me a bit about yourself.
Hi, Isra. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you here. It's a pleasure to be here having a conversation with you. And I have many interests, but all along my career and my professional development, I've always loved cities. I find cities are artistic expressions and the repository of history. And, each city is different and it reflects its culture and its development. To me, that's fascinating. So what I wish I could do a lot is travel around the world, visiting all these cities. And I've been lucky to visit a few, but I hope I still have more. I also love architecture as an art and human expression, and design in general, the fact that humans have the capability of modifying their environment to make it more livable, and as time goes by, make it more pleasant and attractive and comfortable. And that involves both buildings and cities and the way we live.
Wonderful. So what got you into architecture and urban planning?
That's a very good question. And all through high school, in my education in Venezuela, as you mentioned, I had a very strong focus on science. And when I started to learn chemistry, I fell in love with chemistry. It was like a game, a game of letters and numbers and values and equations. I loved it. So I was going to be a chemist. But suddenly, when I graduated from high school, I pictured myself in a lab always. And I thought, that's not for me. And in looking for a place to be, architecture seemed interesting. And there was a lot of very interesting modern architecture around me, because Caracas, the city where I grew up, is basically a modernist city, and it was booming in the 70s. And So to me, that looked like an interesting choice that would combine science with art and with human character and history. So I went that way just at the last, as a last minute decision, and I never regret it. It was a hint. I don't know what to say.
It was, definitely was. It was a good uh, change of heart. So I know that you've recently had an interview with the ABD magazine or periodic, and it's about Boston 2030 vision or horizon. So you want to tell us a bit about the
Yeah.
Boston vision, the 2030?
Yeah, basically this was a Spanish electronic publication or e-magazine called E-Prime, and it's very much focused on real estate development and design related to development. And that's what the main question they asked me. They wanted to know my opinion about the Imagine Boston with 2030, which is basically the general plan, the comprehensive vision for the future of the city. And I think it has been a really interesting process because um, during the planning stage, which took a few years, the city planning and development agency met with communities, business leaders, all sorts of neighborhood committees, all sorts of civic players in the life of the city of Boston, and came out with this document, which is basically on a website, and they intend to keep updating. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's very interesting. It's like a live plan that is not just a printed document like we used to traditionally do. Mm-hmm. And so some of their vision basically is to have a more sustainable city, to try to promote pedestrians and bicyclists, and because it's very difficult to actually mitigate traffic in Boston. Traffic is a real problem, and it doesn't seem to be diminishing, but rather growing. Even now after COVID, that activity is starting to come back to a certain degree, but traffic is out there is almost as bad as it used to be. So traffic is a real problem, and it doesn't have an easy solution, but trying to carve out spaces for bicycles and improve the conditions for pedestrians are very important city goals. Also, they are trying to promote affordable housing because another big problem in Boston today is the lack of affordable housing, and people have to move to other neighborhoods or out of the city because it's too difficult to afford housing in the city. And that's a real problem at all levels.
Yeah, we were warning of the dangers of gentrification. So I don't expect everyone to understand what gentrification is. Do you want to tell us what gentrification is?
Yeah,
Why are you worried about that?
I give you my 2 cents. I don't know if it's a technical definition or not, but gentrification is, when neighborhoods change and they become more expensive because maybe there's new development, new housing projects or investment, and suddenly rents go up or property values go up, and the people that live in the neighborhood cannot afford to continue to be there. So it's a real social problem. But on one hand, it's very difficult to avoid because the way I see it, in a city like Boston that has a lot of old historic neighborhoods that were all built at once, in the early 20th century, let's say 1910, 1920, like the neighborhood where I live or my house. These buildings today are 80, 90 years old. And unless they have been very well maintained through the years, they are in poor condition, or they can deteriorate easily if there hasn't been investment in keeping them up. So a lot of these old neighborhoods need to be fixed, and fixing is very expensive. It's not just the cost of construction and materials, but old buildings were not designed for modern ways of living. So we want to have appliances, we want to have internet, good heating, AC. AC in Boston is not necessarily needed, or it was not needed historically, because there's only 3 months in the year when AC is really useful. But those 3 months are becoming more and more hot as time goes by and climate changes, and we see the trends. Temperatures are going up, and summers are getting longer and hotter. And for the elderly and for the very young, it could be fatal. When there are heat waves here in the US and in Europe, and we are getting more and more frequent heat waves. The ones that suffer the most and that are most at risk health-wise are the elderly and the babies, the children. So having AC is becoming a real need, at least for those 3 months. So all those things were not designed in the old houses, and to adapt old houses to modern ways of living, not saying modern ways of working, in the case of historic office buildings, is difficult and very expensive. So it often involves attracting developers to a certain degree. And it's a conundrum. If we don't fix these buildings, they will deteriorate and become unhealthy. But if we fix them, it's so expensive that the typical people that lived in the neighborhood for years, or their children, may not be able to afford it. So that is a real problem that a lot of cities have to deal with, especially cities that are in high demand, because they have good jobs, good amenities, because they are good places to live.
Yeah, yeah. I certainly wish I can afford live in Back Bay, let's say. But I've been working on a project on a building there, and I know how difficult their problem is, even probably structural problems. I heard about water leakage from the roof, and steam was coming through the building, and they found out it all the way across the street. There's a building that has a fireplace that have a chimney connected to that. It's very around a block away building, and one tenant just thought they wanted to use the fireplace, and then they had smoke coming in the other building. And after very long investigation, they found where the smoke is coming from. And that person said, "I just bought this apartment. They told me it has a fireplace. I want to use it."
Yeah. Yeah.
And probably they're gonna go through a legal. That was not my scope about the building,
Yeah.
but they told me that story, and it was wow.
So, the little I've thought about this, I don't think I have a solution, but I think that um, the problem is so big, the problem of gentrification and the need to reinvest in our neighborhoods to keep them lively, that I I believe the private sector alone cannot do it because the scale of the problem is so big. As you say, you may buy an apartment here or a condo or rent it, and then what happens in the building next door is beyond your control. But so, that's why we need city planning and some kind of regulations to help us all live safely together. So I think that cities, and I know cities and planners, they are very concerned about this and they are trying to find ways to mitigate this terrible problem without killing investment, because without investment, there's no one to pay for these fixes that we need to have. So part of it is to have zoning or requirements that when a developer comes in to renovate a building or to add or to tear it down because it's very old and build a new one, that some percentage of the new housing is dedicated to people with certain moderate income or low income levels. Normally, low income levels require a lot of financial help to build the gap. There's a gap between what people can afford and the cost of fixing the units or to redevelop or renovate the place. So with low income families, it's very difficult and they need a special financial contributions. It has to be special organizations, non-profits that get money through different sources to invest. But affordable housing generally refers to moderate income people. It's your teachers, your firefighters, your policemen, your taxi drivers, people that cannot afford the high cost of living in the city today, but that are vital for the success, the livelihood of the city, and they are a vital part of society. So what planners and city planning agencies are trying to do is find ways to subsidize some units so that they are affordable for these moderate income families.
How do we make sure that the subsidized or affordable housing units would have the same quality as market price units? Or the developer is going to say, well, these are affordable. I'm going to use very poor finishes, very poor siding, or cheaper windows just to get it done. And anyways, I'm not going to make a lot of profit on that because the government or the city wants me to rent it for a lower fee.
Well, when a building is designed, it has to go through a permitting process. In small buildings, in large projects, there is design review. The city, at least giving the city of Boston as an example, and many other cities and towns, when there is a project bigger than a certain amount of square feet or a certain number of units, they trigger a special zoning clause that brings design review. And one of the things that are looked at very carefully during the design review is precisely that point, especially if it's a housing project, because the affordable unit is the same unit. Actually, typically, most affordable units have a clause. What makes them affordable is a contract, a sales contract or a lease contract, that the cost cannot go above a certain amount. And those clauses typically end after 30 years. So that, after 30 years, it's considered that if somebody has been in that unit and they want to sell it, it should go into market prices, because who knows what the conditions will be in 30 years. So there is a cap. Now, so that means you cannot have units that are less quality than others. And I believe that affordable housing provisions in zoning often have language to that effect.
That's awesome.
So that there's flexibility, and eventually they may become markets. So it wouldn't be good for the value of the unit to have lesser features.
Right.
On the other hand, it depends a lot on the city government, because I've also read about cases of places in New York where they even have given separate entrances to affordable units so that they don't mix to the high income with the high income people. And that's something definitely that today we in the planning and design world want to avoid. We want equity. So there is a big push for equity, and cities are aware, and they are becoming more aware of these issues as time goes by.
Okay, that's wonderful, because I was speaking with another guest from Minneapolis, and she was telling me that because her neighborhood is historically a poor neighborhood, they even don't want architects to design these units. They keep investing and bringing investors from other places, but they're providing very poor quality units because these people are poor. We're gonna give them poor. But her argument is excellent that poor people deserve good design, even if you don't want them to be poor forever. They don't deserve to be neglected and not having amenities. And she was telling me they don't even have restaurants. The whole large district only have 4 fast food restaurants.
I totally agree. Now, as I said, when it's trying to make housing affordable for low-income families is very difficult because there is this gap. So it's very difficult to get the large contribution or subsidy or the large amount of money to fill the gap. And sometimes maybe the builder or it has to go to a lower budget kind of finishes. And so it's a matter of evaluating what's the best benefit within the scheme. What are we trying to do? But also, as I said, zoning and zoning provisions about affordable housing. If a project is very small, then these provisions don't kick in, because if it's a small property owner that maybe just has one building and asks for a permit for 3 units, how can we ask that one of them be affordable or be low income? So there are limits, and these provisions that try to achieve equity and affordability are more manageable and enforceable in larger projects for that reason.
Yeah. So you just mentioned that the traffic issues in Boston, and definitely I'm one of the people who had to suffer through the traffic. To your knowledge, are there any plans to solve, or do you have any suggestions to decision makers on how to overcome these problems?
Well, I think the trend is to try to discourage people from driving. That would be the solution, because there's only so much room, and there is back in the 60s or the 70s, the whole idea was, let's make streets bigger so that there's room for cars. But today we planners, I mean, planners and designers, and also educators, we think that if you make it big, they come. So bigger streets don't solve the traffic problem. What happens is, and this is something really interesting that I've learned through practice. If you have a very big street, um, traffic moves very fast, then stops at the light. The light changes and they move very fast. So the street is empty half of the time because there's not enough cars to fill it up. They are all packed at the intersection waiting for the light. And the rest of the street is empty. And they speed, and it's dangerous for pedestrians unless they cross at the light. So that's the old vision. Today, the vision is if you narrow the street, you feed the same cars, but instead of going, move quickly, stop, they have to move more slowly and maybe stop less. Mm-hmm. So there's more cars in the street, but they are always moving. The number of cars doesn't change. But by doing that, if people would understand that they are in a street with a lot of commercial activity, a lot of residents, and they should not be moving fast because it's dangerous. You could hit a pedestrian, or if they understood that they could keep moving a little bit more slowly but efficiently, we could get more spaces for pedestrians and more spaces for bicycles that are healthy, are very efficient in a intermediate range. Let's say you want to move, if you want to walk, it's difficult to walk more than a mile, right? A mile may take 10 minutes, half hour to walk. So people hardly walk more than that unless they want to. So walking is a certain distance, but then the car is wonderful for longer distances, let's say 10 miles, 15 miles, if you live in the city. But there is that in between, between the mile and the 10 miles, or the 8 miles. And those are great distances for people that love bicycles. And so we want to encourage bicycles to help people travel those intermediate distances in a way that is healthy and doesn't pollute the environment as cars do.
Yeah, so we can create bike-friendly routes, maybe bridges, maybe instead of building tunnels and bridges, we can do bridges and tunnels for pedestrians. And
that's what we are trying to do in cities like Boston or New York or Seattle or Washington, D.C. or Portland, Oregon, you name it. We are trying to create that type of environment so that people can live healthier lives, because all these cities are choked by the automobile and trucks. The only other problem is that all our deliveries, our supplies are basically truck oriented. So a lot of traffic and pollution comes from deliveries, not just people moving from one place to another. Of course, public transit is the other important variable in the equation. And a lot of the older cities have been developing public transit that is quite efficient, but COVID has altered everything so much, even public transit, and we have to see what happens as time goes by. Hopefully people go back, but a lot of people are reluctant at this point to go back to transit because of fear of the virus, getting the virus, being so close to each other in contained environments. So there's a lot of work we need to do to improve public transit to a point where people are comfortable riding again.
So, from what you're seeing, and I'm seeing things too, with the city of Boston, let's say, um, or businesses around Boston, what did people learn from the COVID experience and what's being implemented? What are they taking permanently, and what is like we're going back to where we are? Is it like, do you see people are like doing like 3 days a week instead of 5 days work? Is it becoming more flexible? Are people working from home? What are you seeing? What are the changes that you see?
About the work, about the working environment, it's very hard to tell because we are now in the transition. And, you know, without doubt, people have learned that some flexibility is good, whether they are young moms or young fathers or just independent singles. Um, it's good to have some flexibility and a little bit of control over your life. Doesn't mean you wouldn't do the work. You know, it's interesting. If you read the paper, there's articles about how people are more efficient when they have flexible hours because they can find the right time to do their work and they feel uh, grateful.
Yes.
So that's one version. There's other people that say, uh, no, make no mistake, people are going to go back to the office because it's better to be at the office all the time. So we don't know. It's going to be on a business by business, um, person by person basis. And what I think is interesting is that this past year raised the possibility that people can work from home, and people were forced into it and they found they can be efficient, and a lot of companies may not go back to pay those astronomical rents for the entire company.
Mm.
And there is this new way of looking at working space where people are going to share desks. Um, Google has been a pioneer trying to develop ways and equipment to envision this workplace of the future, but without being too sophisticated. A lot of companies may do so.
Yeah.
They also in the same way that companies have also found that flying to meetings is not always worth the expense. So there's going to be a lot of changes, but it's too early to tell. I don't dare give a forecast because it's very difficult to tell. But there's some things that I see that may hold. For example, during COVID, people took time to go out on walks, to go out to run, go to visit a park, walk in the park, you know, after being at home within four walls all day long. People rediscovered nature in the city. And to me, that's something that I think is very important and I hope will stay. Another thing that I noticed is that people are more patient when you go to the store or the bank or you wait in line. You know, like lines are still measured so that people stay 6 feet apart. And people, you know, I've learned, and I think a lot of people have learned not to go straight to the front desk, but just to wait and look around and see where should you stand while you wait. So that's very that's something that may disappear, but I wish would stay a little bit longer because I think it helps things work better. And then a lot of restaurants and cafes have taken parking spaces from the street and equipped them as an outdoor terrace. And and the city looks amazing when you go to some places
Yeah.
like the North End or you know, downtowns where there's more people on the street. And will that hold? I don't know, because as I say, cars want to come in and cars want to find spaces to park. but hopefully this allows the more central districts in a city to be more pedestrian and more walkable. That would be great.
That's wonderful. So, do you know about any plans about self-driving cars, high tech, sensors in the city? Does that showing up on your radar? Like there are plans to implement these things in the city of Boston, or it's still not there yet?
We have talked about this for years, and I think it's coming, but I don't think I don't see a rush. And I understand because I myself personally I feel uneasy about this. I I don't know um, how safe it will be to be sitting in a car that has no driver. But I know it's coming. It's coming, but I don't know how soon. Uh, the other interesting thing is that a lot of vehicles have sensors already in them, even the ones that are driven by people. You have these rear view screens, and the car can sense if there is an object, and the car stops if it senses objects around it. So that's already there in the market in cars that are not necessarily futuristic. Just a lot of current models, especially the more expensive ones, have these features. So I think that it's coming and that we will see it and slowly adjust to it. It may become natural someday. Like in the highway, a lot of cars have cruise systems today, and you never know if the car next to you is using it or not. We don't know who's using it, but it's there, and I bet a lot of people use them. So these technologies get into our lives slowly, and before we know it, we may just be in an environment where cars are very, very highly automated, even if it's not necessarily a full fashion, because a lot of people may still like to drive. Like me, I'm old fashioned. I love driving.
You love driving?
Yeah,
Yeah,
even if I try not to, but it's fun. It's fun. So
yeah, there's some joy to it. So would smaller, like people behavioral changes would make traffic problems easier? Like let's say um, smaller, if consumers were more interested in smaller cars, like the cars we see in Europe or in Paris or London, would that reduce the traffic problems? Would that be helpful?
I don't know, but it would be useful for the city.
For the environment would be.
Yeah.
Or it would consume
Like
less.
if we could have one car for the city and one car for the road. The thing is that here in the Americas, I won't say the US only or Canada, but the Americas in general that are more have a lot of land and have developed later in history than the old world, than the old European cities or Asian or Middle Eastern cities. So in these newer cities, we have a lot of suburbs, a lot of land, and it's necessary to move, and it's a luxury to have two cars, one for the city, one for the road. So if we could do that, then it would make a lot of sense, and people would choose to have a small car in the city. I think it would be handy. But if you are going out on the road every day because you live 1 hour away or 2 hours away, or if you have a job that makes you travel, little cars don't feel as safe. And maybe it's a perception more than a reality. But as long as we have big vehicles on the road, like large trucks, and little cars are vulnerable out there on the road, on the highway.
Right.
So that's a problem. How do we mix those two needs of transportation? So for the people that spend a long time on the highway, it wouldn't make sense to have a little car. That's my view. Maybe it's an old-fashioned view, but I think that so depending on what we can afford, a best solution would be to use public transit, to have really good, efficient public transit, because a bus, the most of, I read this somewhere, or I heard it somewhere, the most efficient vehicle is a school bus, because in the footprint of 2 cars, it carries 40 people. And because it's a school bus, it's on a fixed route. And the route is designed to be the shortest possible and the most efficient, because you don't want kids to be going around the city all day long. You want to take them to school quickly and then home. So, that's the ideal. If we can pack 40 people in the footprint of 2 cars, it means that public transit helps a lot to alleviate traffic. But it's even if we have very little electric clean vehicles that are self-driven, how many people could be there? 2, 3, 4? So maybe we have 3 little cars with 6 people compared to a bus that can carry 40. So there is a difference there.
So this makes me think, if people, this just a crazy idea that just came to me. If people are still insisting they don't want to work from home, maybe then they can, of course, we can't force people to sell their houses and move because they have family ties or 2 people working. But maybe we can come up with Workshare commercial buildings where each company rents a very small desk, let's say, or desks, or I think you were telling us about the hoteling where someone can work and leave, and I think that's what the new term, I'm not sure, but I heard that term, hoteling, the desk. they stay on the desk for 2 days, and similar to children commuting to schools, we offer them public transportation, and with pre-assigned routes. Of course, they can use their bike, they can use anything else, but they can use these buildings as their workstations, and instead of going to the city and the commute problem, it would be easier. And then there's the headquarters, when they're going to probably need to go once a month to the headquarters. But you can either work from home, where you have your workstation, or work from your co-working place or hoteling something, Workshare. Or if you are really needed in the headquarters, let's say in Boston, Back Bay, or Government Center, then on that day you're commuting all the way there. So,
well, definitely shuttles are a good solution. For many years now, we've been transportation planners have been looking at developing shuttles to carry people in circuits when people move within a very specific area. So, for example, places like the Longwood medical area, where there are several hospitals, medical school, lots of facilities, affiliated facilities. All the employees park remotely, and there's a shuttle bus or several shuttle buses that go mini routes and take people from the car to work, and it's highly efficient. They could be um, alternative fuel vehicles. So that could be a very useful way of organizing a community, whether it is a working community or a living community. So transportation solutions that involve a relatively short circuit with several stops and a lot of use are highly efficient and can be very comfortable.
Very similar to the T line, but just more focused on where people. So if there's a shuttle that like the one you're talking about, that where I can park my car and on the North Station, I live on the North Shore. On the North Station, I can park and use. That would be awesome. That would probably give me an hour or 2 hours of the commute.
I agree. I totally agree. I'm going to see if I can. Okay, I turned on a light a little bit because it's getting dark in here.
So, Margarita, if if you were if you had the let's say the power and the budget and let's say like a magic wand, what to make changes to the city of the Boston to the best, what would you do? What would these changes be?
I would bring more trees and vegetation close to people. Whether it is all new buildings should have a balcony, all new apartments should have a balcony. People may use them, people may not, but it's their little personal open space attached to their unit. I think we need more trees. Trees are so beneficial. They clean the air, they mitigate the heat island effect, they absorb water from the soil when it rains a lot, that they give us shade. Um, they are beautiful and they are alive. So I would bring small amounts of landscape close to people at their workplace or their place of living, in the streets, wherever there is a parking lot that's a sea of asphalt. It could still be parking, but have a few trees to mitigate all that heat and all that dryness.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Margarita. I really appreciate that you made the time to do this interview, and I'm sure it's going to be super beneficial to a lot of people. So thank you so much, and
Thank you, Isra. Anytime.
stay